Look, the Sony A7S III is one of the most popular new cameras out there. I myself personally woke up at 7 a.m. on the West Coast the day it was announced and pre-ordered mine right away. I've been shooting with it almost exclusively for the last 2 months now. It's one of my favorite cameras that I've ever used, and you might be considering purchasing one yourself, especially if you're watching this video. Now, before you go ahead and hit add to cart, there's a few warnings that I've discovered over the last 2 months of shooting with it that I think you should probably be aware of. Let's get into it. The first thing that I wish I knew before purchasing the Sony A7S III was that the files were going to be very sluggish to edit with. I'm personally running a 2017 15-inch MacBook Pro that's pretty spec'd out, and I have a lot of trouble editing these files in Premiere Pro. Something I did not know is that you can actually create proxies in the camera while doing your normal recording, and then you can link these proxies up to completely streamline your workflow. You edit off the proxies and then render your final project using the full video files. Now, editing with proxies is nothing new, but the ability to record them in the camera is actually very, very handy, and it's something that I wish I knew and could have saved some time on in the past. Javier Mercedes has a great video on how to set this up for Premiere Pro. I'll link to it somewhere up there. The second thing that I wish I knew when I pre-ordered this is that you do not need the fancy new CFExpress Type A cards and the accompanying CFExpress A reader. These two things, 3 if you get 2 of the cards, are very, very expensive. And while the transfer speed is incredibly fast, you don't really need these cards. The only time you're really gonna need to use these cards is if you are recording in the super high bitrate 4K 120 in S&Q mode. I think I've used that mode exactly 1 time just to test it out. This is pretty much overkill for most things, and I personally like the ability to record audio, which you cannot do in S&Q mode, so there's kind of no point for my personal needs. Again, I pre-ordered this at 7 a.m., so I was a little bit groggy and I was worried that they were gonna sell out, so I just purchased 2 of them plus the CFExpress A reader. The reader also does double as an SD card reader, which is pretty handy, but it is pretty big and heavy, especially when compared to a normal SD card reader. So I'd personally opt for saving a couple $100 and opting for some fast SD cards. I personally prefer Kingston, ProGrade, or Lexar memory. Now this next one is probably the most painful for me. Currently, on Mac Finder, you cannot preview the thumbnails for photos or video clips within the Finder. This is extremely, extremely annoying for all of my file management. Sorting clips from different shoots, sorting different scenes from the same shoot, sorting photos from one another. It can be very, very daunting when you can't actually see the files that you are looking at. Even when previewing clips, you have to open them in VLC. QuickTime cannot even run them. Now, a point to note, I am currently using Mac OS Catalina. I think that this might be solved by Big Sur, but currently I am unable to update because my system administrator says I can't update for security reasons. So hopefully that one is at least solved fairly quickly. Next is a few quirks that occur at 4K 120. Now this is billed and advertised as a 4K 120 camera. However, there's a few things that don't actually work in 4K 120. Remember those super helpful proxies I was talking about earlier? Well, you can't actually generate proxies in the camera when shooting in 4K 120 or 1080 120 for that matter. So if you're shooting a mixture of 24 and 120 frames per second, you have a mixture hodgepodge of some clips already having proxies, the other ones you have to generate within Premiere. It's a little bit of a hassle. Another thing that does not work in 4K 120 is active steady shot. Active steady shot has been a huge improvement for the A7S III, and I love it. It has turned a lot of my handheld shots into gimbal looking shots when not filmed in 120 because the active steady shot image stabilization does not work in 4K 120. The normal steady shot does work, but it doesn't give you that same level of stability that the active image stabilization does. Now, of course, when you're filming in 120, you already have the added stabilization that comes from slowing down your footage, so it might not be a deal breaker for everybody, but I've currently found myself doing more of the filming in 4K 60 because some of those features like proxies and active steady shot are not available in 4K 120. Okay, now this last one is actually something that I did know about, but I wanna make sure that you know about it, and that is the use of third-party batteries. So Sony has their special Sony batteries, and there are companies that make knockoff third-party batteries that are way cheaper. The issue is that Sony has firmware installed in these cameras where if you use a non-Sony battery in your camera, an error message will pop up and it'll say that it cannot guarantee the safety of this battery. Well, that sounds pretty freaking scary. The thing is you can actually use the battery. Nothing bad is going to happen, but you have this 2-option menu that will pop up in the middle of your workflow and ruin your workflow and ruin your shot. Not to mention, if you click cancel, your camera will just straight up shut off. It's just off now. Like, that's not helpful at all, obviously. So me personally, I have one third-party battery. It does work, but I keep it for absolute dire emergencies. I always keep it charged. I keep it in my bag as a last-ditch effort in case all of my other batteries are currently dead. So for me, this is one area where I would personally spend the extra to get the certified real Sony batteries to save yourself the headache, and you'll probably just want to throw these away, so you're gonna waste 50 bucks on these anyways. So are any of these things deal breakers? For me personally, no. I think I'll probably eventually upgrade my computer that will have an easier time handling the files. I have plenty of these Sony batteries already, and I can deal with all those other quirks. I just want to make sure that you're aware of the quirks before buying them so that you're not disappointed with your $3,500 purchase at some point in the future, because it's going to end up being a larger purchase when you have to buy the expensive batteries, and hopefully you save some money by not buying the CFExpress Type A cards. So guys, if you did like this video, go ahead and play thumb war with the like button. I have a couple of other videos that are popping up on the screen right now because I do a lot of other camera related stuff. So if you like this one, you might like some of those ones as well. Subscribe if that's something you haven't done already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Now, editing with proxies is nothing new, but so I'd personally just save a couple of hundred, I'm gonna get this, couple hundred bucks. So I'd personally opt for saving a couple $100 and just go for some fast SD cards.